Our two speakers today are Orthodox women who've recently received smicha from Yeshivat Maharat in New York. We are honored to welcome Rabba Daniella Pressner from Nashville, Tennessee, my previous home, and Rabbanit Judith Levitan from Sydney, who will reflect on their mid-career journeys into the Rabbanit and will share how age and experience influence their learning. Rabba Daniella Pressner is head of school at the Akiva School in Nashville, Tennessee. She received a BA in dance and religion from Barnard College and an MA from Vanderbilt University. She has studied at Drisha, Pardes, and the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Rabba Daniella is a past president of Jewish Family Services and serves on the board of the Jewish Middle School of Nashville. She has been published in multiple journals and has taught nationally on curricular design and on children and spirituality. She is married to Rabbi Saul Strasberg of Congregation Shereth Israel in Nashville and has 4 children. Rabbanit Judith Levitan lives here in Sydney and is a lawyer with over 15 years experience in the field of social justice. She currently works at Legal Aid New South Wales, where she uses human-centered design to innovate and improve legal services for disadvantaged people. She holds degrees in law and social work and also studied at Midreshet Harova and Nishmat. Her honors thesis examined family violence in the Orthodox Jewish community, and she was a founding member of the Jewish Alliance Against Family Violence. She regularly represents the New South Wales Jewish community at interfaith events, runs women's tefillah services, and teaches bat mitzvah. So without any further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over the session to these two most accomplished women. Please go ahead, ladies.
Thank you so much for having us. We are so excited to be here, to be learning with everybody, and we really want you to feel free to take part in this as a conversation. So you may hear us asking questions. Also, please feel free to post questions so that Sharon can share them and we can really keep this open and easy. So Judith, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I know that you are ready to begin.
Okay, so what we thought we would do is talk first a little bit about the experience of learning together and the way that we learned together. So we learned together in as study partners. That's the relationship that first developed as a chavruta. So the way it would work, just to kind of set the background scene or the context, is we learned together for 3 years, twice a week for about an hour or so. We were given our packet or a document each week, of pages and pages of Jewish texts, which really took you on a history ride throughout of Jewish history with the texts that spanned from the constitution documents of like the Gemara and the Mishnah all the way through looking at the medieval commentators, the codifiers to modern poskim. And we had our task was to read through, understand these materials and be prepared to come to the lecture once a week where the rabbi would summarize and bring all these ideas together. So we had to read through these texts, decipher what they meant, translate them, and also find some meaning in them. And I guess this kind of sets up what happened at one level. On the other level, what happens in a chavruta is that really what you are doing is you are wrestling to make that text your own. So we helped each other. The way that a chavruta works is we helped each other to actually just literally understand the text. What does this word mean? What do these abbreviations mean? And because there's 2 of us, right, 2 heads is better than 1. So we kind of could fill in the gaps for each other or the blanks for each other as things came up. And then there is also an element of, I guess, argument or discussion around what are the different interpretations of this text? What is the rabbi, what is the author trying to actually say? And really weighing up then those different interpretations, so that by the end of the study session, you don't just have this abstract text, you have something that you feel a sense of ownership over and that you have really ingested, I guess, into your being. Is there anything else you want to add, Daniella, about how a chavruta generally works, or how our chavruta work?
I think the only interesting thing to add is that Judith and I didn't know each other at all before we began this program together, and probably would never have met unless we, without this opportunity. And so that's just another interesting lens through which to view kind of what transpired over 3 years.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the title of this topic is You're Never Too Old to Learn. And so I also think, you know, and how our experiences, how learning in middle age sort of shaped our experience. And I think that there is definitely a very different experience of doing a chavruta when you're sort of in high school, fresh out of high school, you know, studying at university, to when you are doing a chavruta or studying literally in the middle of your life. Because the way the chavruta worked was that it, and the study worked, was that it was essentially just inserted into the middle of our very busy lives. So one of our colleagues talked, you know, was reflecting on this, and she made reference to the book by Virginia Woolf, A Room of One's Own. And she said how it's important to have a room of one's own. But in our very busy lives, I mean, you heard about, you know, Daniella is juggling a congregation, a school, also work, school, family responsibilities. How to find that physical room of one's own, I think, was very difficult. But what we were very fortunate to discover was this literal virtual room where we could study, just like we are speaking to you now today. And, you know, that virtual room also was virtual in a sense that there wasn't necessarily a particular time in the day where we would be able to go and sit quietly with no noise or interruption. We're studying as life is happening around us. And I think that is definitely an experience that is particular to this period of time in our lives. And I think what this shows really in a way is that anybody can do it. You don't need a physical room of one's own and that space. It's really about just, you know, almost finding those micro times where you can slip in a bit of learning or a bit of reflection. And so I think that's also like a message to give to everybody, that you can create this virtual room for yourselves to learn in. Daniella, do you have any other thoughts about particularly learning in a chavruta at this time in our lives?
No, I think that's beautiful. Judith, keep going.
Okay. So if we look then at how our rabbis describe the experience of a chavruta, we have in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, which is the Mishnah, Yehoshua ben Parachia, who says, make for yourself a teacher, aseh lecha rav, kne lecha chaver, and acquire for yourself a companion. So you can think of this as two separate ideas. Get yourself a teacher, get yourself a friend. But really, I think that the reflecting on our experience of the chavruta process, it's been this process where aseh lecha rav, like make yourself a teacher, where we, as Daniella mentioned, we didn't know each other. I'm sitting in Sydney, Australia. She's in Nashville, Tennessee. Our paths would never have crossed, and we didn't know each other. So what started out with really as a mutual learning process, as I said in that chavruta, you know, someone fills in the blanks here, someone fills in the blanks there. You learn, you discuss. I've learned from Daniella. And then what happens is over that time, you also acquire for yourself a chaver, a friend. And I think the way that works is because chaver means to be, comes from the Hebrew word, or the root of the Hebrew word chet, bet, resh, which means to join. But it doesn't mean to fuse. So it doesn't mean that you become one. You're sort of sitting as two separate, but together, and you're kind of like joined at the boundary, if you like. And so there's, in terms of, relationship to the text, you've got yourself, you've got the other, and you've got the text, and you're all sort of sitting together, and there's this interrelationship between all of them. And Rachel Adler, who is a Jewish feminist, actually the analogy that she brought is that it's like the cell membrane. That's where all the action takes place, is sort of on the outside with these interactions and these flows happening between, so that you still maintain your sense of self, but you are then relating to another person, and together you are relating to the text. And I think, like, in terms of the way that friendship develops, is that you learn about the other person. You learn how that other person thinks, how that other person organizes their thoughts, how that other person studies, and you develop this relationship in this profound way because you have that insight into that other person. And so it really was this process of from teacher to friend. Okay, we can go. Do you want to put up the next slide? Okay, so the other thing is, like, why in Jewish tradition do we have this chavruta? Why do you need a chavruta? Can't you just go and read like, I could have just read those texts in that packet myself and and been prepared to go to the lecture. So why? And if you see throughout the Mishnah and the Gemara, you see there are these pairs. There are all these chavrutas, and I'll talk a bit about one famous chavruta. But this seems to be the way of studying, this dialectic, this dialogue that goes on. And I really think it's because it's a really effective way of learning. It helps to sharpen your mind. So here in the Talmud, we see in Masechet Tanit, Rabbi Hama, son of Rabbi Hanina, said, "What is the meaning of that which is written?" So this is from Mishlei, from Proverbs. So they're commenting on a quote or a pasuk, a verse from Proverbs. Iron sharpens iron. So explaining, what does that mean? Iron sharpens iron. So too, man or women sharpen the countenance of their friends. So this verse comes to tell you that just as with these iron implements, one sharpens the other when they're rubbed together, so too when Torah scholars study together, they sharpen one another in halacha. And I think this is the experience is like this. You're not just reading it and hearing the voice in your head of that text. You are literally like, so I think there's one experience when you read something by yourself. There's another sort of more immediate experience when you read something out loud. And then it takes it to another level when you have someone else, when you literally have another voice reading that text, because that other voice comes with their inflections and their interpretation and their understanding of what to emphasize, and you are then, forced to confront that or to look at that and see whether or not you agree with that. So I think this idea of hearing the text and hearing another voice and seeing this multiplicity of perspectives, and then, with that cell membrane analogy that we have, you then, take it, ingest it, take what you want for it. Your experience is so much more richer than if you just read it on your own in your head. And I think also this idea of coming to study in middle age, like in the middle of our lives, again, when you're younger, perhaps things are a bit more black and white and you are sort of more solid in the views that you might hold, and maybe less used to understanding or coming at things from other perspectives. But as you grow older, I think you are more and more used to, because you need to in order to have relationships with people. So you are more and more used to that idea of listening to somebody else's perspective. So in a way that does make it a little bit easier to be able to do that and to reflect, to listen, to understand. Okay. So then the next slide. So I mentioned to you this, like the Gemara is replete with different Chavruta experiences. So the one that I wanted to touch on is this experience, just a Chavruta in action, which is Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish. So just by way of some background, Rabbi Yochanan was extremely good looking. He was like, and this is like a tragic love story if ever there was one, but Rabbi Yochanan was extremely good looking. And Resh Lakish was the prototype bad boy. He was this bandit, this bushranger, this, you know, good for nothing. And he came across Rav Yochanan and mistook him for a woman and was like just so attracted to him. And Rav Yochanan managed to wheel him in. He offered his sister in marriage to Resh Lakish. And the two of them, and he kind of got him involved in studying and learning Torah. And I won't go into the details of, but they had an argument, and eventually Resh Lakish died, and Rav Yochanan was left totally despairing and totally in grief because he'd lost this sparring partner, he'd lost this study partner. And the rabbis didn't know what to do. And so they like, okay, let's get him another chavruta. Maybe this will like raise him up, like raise up his spirits. And so they brought this other rabbi, Rabbi Elazar ben Padat, who also was like very fine in his analysis. And the rabbi would come and sit with Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan would say something, and then the other rabbi would go, yes, I agree, and here's your support. And Rabbi Yochanan blew up. He was like, ugh, this is ridiculous. This is terrible. You know, I don't want you to agree with me. I want you to fight with me. When I had Resh Lakish, I would bring one thing. He would bring 24 ideas the other way. I would fight it back the other way. You see, that's the sharpening of the iron on iron until you get a refinement of what the halacha was. And Rav Yochanan was so overcome with grief that eventually, and this loss of this ability to have this chavruta, that he passed away also, that he died, out of grief. But I think like what to take from this chavruta in action is the fact that the chavruta is where it is dynamic. There is a dialectic. There is this dialogue going on. It's not just, what do you think? Oh, yes, I agree with you. Like there's real engagement and real dialogue. And I think the fact that, for us, here I am in Sydney, Australia, my perspective is very different from Nashville, Tennessee. So we both bring these very different perspectives to the text. Okay.
So
to you, Daniella.
Thanks, Judith. So really what, a piece of this is for both of us, it's been bridging both the chavruta and experience, our own personal experiences, what we bring to the fore. I thought to transition between the discussion on chavruta and its purpose to the discussion of the impact of experience on our lives, that I thought this poem could really bring it home. Min hamakom shebo anu tzodkim lo yitzmechu le'olam parachim be'aviv. This idea that from the place where, when we come from a place where we're right and everybody else is wrong, or we have the only vision and everybody else has a different vision, that place will never, flowers will never be able to sprout from that place. And I really think that, to me, this is something that's always been so important for anybody that I've learned with, whether I'm teaching students or whether students are teaching me, whether I'm learning with my chavruta, whether I'm learning with, just a friend for a one-off learning experience. It's this idea of always being open to hearing where somebody else's experience influences their understanding and how somebody else's experience influences their understanding. And to me, that's one of the most powerful and beautiful spaces to start in learning. So what I wanted to start with, and I'm actually going to stop sharing the screen for a moment because I want to be able to see everyone's faces. I'm going to stop and ask, what is a watershed event in your life? And I know that we've just met. For many of you, I've just met you, maybe 15 minutes ago. But for some of you, I know you. And I want everyone to feel equally generous and equally, willing to share. And I just want to hear, for anyone who is willing to share, can you just bring up a watershed event in your life? So a moment in your life where something changed, and for whatever reason, the rest of your life could never be seen in the same way. Is anybody willing to share? And I'll just look for a raised hand, and or feel free to unmute yourself. Anybody? So we'll start with you, Judith. I told Judith that she'd be the first one. And then Caroline, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay,
sorry, I'm
great.
in the car.
No, trust me, we've all been in the car on a Zoom. You're not the only one. So Caroline, do you want to share what's a watershed event in your life that you're willing to share with us?
I would have to say moving from England to Australia on a whim to marry someone.
Great. And why do you, if you feel comfortable answering this, obviously, it's really nice to meet you, Caroline. Thank you for your generosity. If you could share, why do you think this happened? Like, what allowed you to make that leap?
Well, stupidity might have come into it a bit because I was 21 at the time. I don't know. I just thought faith, actually. It was just a quantum leap of faith. I trust my intuition a lot.
And then what happened as a result? So this was a watershed event. How did your life change drastically from moving from point A to point B?
Oh, in every possible way. Didn't anyone see that film Sliding Doors? I've always equated it to that. Like, what would have happened if I'd stayed? My life was forever changed in good and bad ways. Good and sad ways, I think. Not good and bad.
Can you, if you feel comfortable sharing, can you share a space where you actually thought of a situation differently because of the fact that you had moved? Like, how did that change maybe a future decision that you had to make?
A future decision. Well, I had to get used to the idea of bringing up my kids and having a life 12,000 miles away from the people who knew me and who I knew. I think that was tough. It was hard. Yeah.
Thank you. Is anyone else willing to share?
I think Bobby had her hand up. Bobby Lamore.
Bobby. Okay, great. Thank you.
Bobby, unmute yourself. Alex is helping.
Thanks, Alice.
There we go.
Yay. I think for me, a watershed event that I had no control over whatsoever was becoming a grandmother for the first time. But it changed my life forever. I had always hoped it would be as wonderful as it was, but it was ever so much better. It's just not something that one could even imagine how terrific it would be.
Oh, this is being recorded, and somebody should definitely share that with your grandchildren. I might save it and share it one day. Can you talk a little bit, Bobby, about, how you see the world differently because your grandchildren are in this world?
I'm terribly frightened for them right now that their future may be impacted by this pandemic that we're all experiencing, that their childhood will be different and not as free and not as maybe even complete. as my memories of my own childhood. I think it's just the impact of what they're going through, of not going to school and not seeing their friends. I think that it's really quite shocking.
Brother, grandparents.
Yeah. Alex, did you want to add anything?
No.
Bobby said no.
No, you can add whatever.
Well, actually, it's not just, I mean, we get a chance to see them all the time. They come here and they play out in the water, and it's a lot of fun, but they do miss that part of not being around other kids.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that bothers me too, they don't get a chance to see their other grandparents that much because they live in California, but it's been over a year now. And that's tough for both the other grandparents and the grandkids.
Yes.
On the bright side, grandkids, I mean, I look at them and say, you know, it's, you know, there's a future for us. We lost so much in the Holocaust, and I feel like, you know, here we go. We you know, there's a chance. We'll keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Is there anybody else that wanted to share?
Yeah, Daniella,
Yes, Bob.
a watershed moment was losing my wife years ago, losing a spouse, which, needless to say, changes your life in a very short period of time, depending on how you lose them. In Barbara's case, her husband died suddenly. In my case, it was 5 years of fighting cancer. So
Yeah.
it changes your world completely in so many different ways, your perspective on relationships, your relationship with your children, perhaps, etc.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah. Thank you. So really and thank you to everybody who shared. I know this is such an interesting and different forum to share. Usually we're in a room with each other. And I think, you know, really the generosity that you bring to this is then what we all benefit from. So thank you. You know, really what I think each of you pointed out is that once you have a moment like this, you're able, for better or worse, to see the world in a different way. And so what I want to transition into is really thinking about how viewing these texts at a later age in our lives really was transformational in a way that I could not have predicted. And I think the thing that describes it most for me is that I grew up going to a Jewish day school. I studied many of these texts in college, in high school, even kind of early on in my marriage before I had children and lost time for everything except for my kids, which is also beautiful. Just time is seen differently. And I think what happens, you know, when, at least for me, I have always loved learning texts. They have always, to me, helped me feel closer to something bigger than myself. To me, it is spiritual to learn texts. And I think, you know, as a child, the text drove my thoughts in many ways. Like I would read a text and then I would think, oh, that text influences me when I make this decision, or that text influences me when I make that decision. And I think what changed, and, you know, when you talk about this watershed event and your ability to see something different, is the events that we go through as we grow up actually then begin to influence our understanding of our texts and the writings that move us. And so I think for me, you know, and we're going to look at a few texts to kind of think that through, but for me, that was a really powerful message that, you know, I came back to Yeshivat Maharat because I felt like I was in a space in my life where intellectually I needed so much more, and I just couldn't find what I needed in what I was doing, even though I love what I'm doing. And having this opportunity to look at texts again with deeper experiences and different experiences actually allowed me to open up this kind of intellectual and spiritual world that had been lacking for me. So, you know, I share that because I always feel like there's something that we can learn from the person sitting next to us, from the person sitting opposite us. And I think there's something really rich in being able to actually set aside time for ourselves that's different. And that time spent learning with Judith was really that time that was profoundly different in many ways. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen again to share a few texts that I thought maybe we could look at together. And please feel free to raise your hand to share thoughts. It's harder for me to see once I start sharing. I can only see 4 people at a time. So if anybody can help, just feel free to unmute yourself and kind of speak to anything that comes up. Everyone should now be able to see. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So what I find actually really interesting is that our Mishnah tells us that different things happen at different ages. Hu haya omer ben 5 shanim lemikra, right? At 5 years old, we're supposed to study scripture. Ben 10 lemishnah. At 10, we study Mishnah. Ben 13 lemitzvot. At 13, we become subject to the commandments, meaning we are required to observe those commandments. Ben 15 letalmud. At 15, you study Talmud. Now, obviously, these ages aren't followed exactly in every single one of these ages. But I guess the question is, what do we think Pirkei Avot, this text that we have, is trying to teach us about age? Like, why this? Anybody?
So this is Naomi. Hello. I don't know if you can see me. But I think what it's saying is that you can learn at any age.
Yeah.
That it's a continuum and that it doesn't just stop and there isn't just one time period to learn.
Fantastic. Thank you, Naomi, and how, what a beautiful thought right now, especially. Can anybody speak to something else that they got from this? So number 1, that you can always learn at many different ages. Number 2, what's something else that we can see from this text?
That you can only learn certain things at certain ages. You might not be able, this is Susan Lamore, you might not be able to learn when you're 5 years old anything about the bridal canopy, for example, but so that you might learn at certain ages certain things. You may not be ripe enough to be learning everything at every age.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, you know, I want to share, I'm really lucky to be in a book group that hasn't met for a really long time. Susan's one of the people in the book group. There are many different ages in that book group. And I think there are times when, you know, we read a text and I come to it from one perspective and Susan shares a completely different perspective and somebody else shares a completely different perspective. And I think you're right, Susan, this is a really valuable piece of this text that, and you could even study the same subject, right? Like you could study kindness at 3 and get something very different than studying kindness at 15 and kindness at 35, and so on. Anybody else want to add?
Can I add something?
Please.
Hi, my name is Pam Abramowitz from the Nashville part of this group. I find it interesting that in the beginning years of life, it's very specific as to what you should study and when you should study it. And it gets so broad as you get older.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking like studying these things when I was a kid and then studying them now in my 30s. It says at 30, the peak of strength. I don't know if I'm as strong as I will ever be right now, but I don't know. I think it's interesting that it gets very broad as you get older.
Yeah. And I think also what you're speaking to is that there is a range of, you know, possibilities in terms of how we view this. Is it spiritual? Is it physical? Is it intellectual? Like, what are we really bringing up as we think about how these different ages influence our understanding and ultimately our connection with others?
Hey, Daniella.
Yeah, Sharon.
Sue Selinger from Sydney. Just looking at that text, it talks about at 30, the peak of strength, but at 80, the age of strength. And I was wondering if you could enlighten me on that, please.
Did you say your name was Sue?
Yes, it is.
Sue. Thank you so much for sharing. What do you, first of all, I always like to ask, what do you think?
Well, I guess at 30, you have the capacity to learn and to understand because you are mentally maybe at your peak, whereas at 80, you have the wisdom of everything that you have experienced and learned in the past, so that you are strong in your experiences and your learnings.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Really, really beautiful. I think also to add to that, interestingly, in Hebrew, there are different words that are shared. So shloshim is for koach. Koach is like, it is kind of a physical thing. And then gvura is what they say at 80, which is, it's actually a strength that's like referenced very much in Kabbalah. And it's, you're right, it's kind of, it's a much deeper, much more, what's the word for it? Visceral strength. You know, it's not something that you're working to attain. It's sort of something that you've attained, and that worldview, that long-term experience allows you to kind of have this strength that's profoundly different than just intellect or just physical strength. Thank you, Sue, so much for pointing that out, because it's actually a piece of this Mishnah that I love. I never like to talk about 100, actually, and I always say, like, maybe they just didn't realize how long people would live, because, and as you see, I didn't even underline it. I just wish that that wasn't there. But I think actually even that last piece is saying, you know, gone completely out of the world, that in all these different moments, you had impact on this world. At 5, you had impact on this world. At 10, you had impact on this world, and the world had the opportunity to impact you. Same thing at 15 and at 50 and at 70 and at 80. And I think those moments of impact actually are what this text is trying to point out, that we have so many different opportunities to learn and to gain in our knowledge, and to gain in our connection to others in this world. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. Yeah. So what I wanted to then think about and just kind of share, since I asked you guys to share so many things, I thought maybe it would also be fair if I shared something about my life growing up. And when I was growing up, as I said, I went to a Jewish day school, and I remember, you know, learning the laws around Shabbat and what you were allowed to do on Shabbat and what you weren't allowed to do on Shabbat, and the 39 malachot, which are these work items that fall under 39 categories, but obviously encompass much, much, much more. And I just remember thinking, am I just supposed to categorize this as like a yes category and a no category? And I kept trying to fight for the nuances. And I just remember feeling like I couldn't really tap into the more. And I think as I've, you know, spent time growing up, trying to raise a family, trying to work while doing that, Shabbat takes on a whole different meaning. And so, you know, when we talk about shamor at Yom HaShabbat, safeguard it, keep it, you know, I don't see safeguarding or keeping anymore as just the do's and the don'ts, but really as this incredible responsibility to keep my family together. And that Shabbat is this moment that I actually have to commit to my family that's profoundly unique and unlike any other day in this world. You know, when I see lo ta'aseh kol malacha, that you shouldn't do any of these work items, I don't any longer see it as these are the 39 categories that you're not supposed to work. And every single time I read one of those 39 categories, and Judith and I can tell you spent hours and hours on those 39 categories.
Look at those categories.
And charting and reading, and but really throughout it all, it was a conversation about elevating one's life in this learning, and elevating our families' lives in this learning. And so that's just, for me, a personal example of how learning something at 17 and at 22 felt really different than learning it now.
And there was also like an immediacy to it, because we were learning about Shabbat, and because of the time difference, like often it was like gonna almost be Shabbat when we were learning, like because it would be Friday afternoon for me. So there's this element of the theoretical learning, you know, and you know, for someone who's like I've kept Shabbat, you know, my entire life, but here we are, we're learning like the intricacies of how the history and this, you know, we talked about that dialogue that the Chavruta has. Well, there's a dialogue that the Jewish people and that the rabbis and the law have in terms of how the laws of Shabbat have progressed, and to sort of be able to see that play out, and then you go and you practically apply it in terms of Shabbat.
Yeah. There were many times where I asked if her roast was ready. And where I was, it was 11 p.m. My eyes were like crossing, and, you know, she has like all the hustle and bustle of Shabbat right in front of her.
So that's that idea of having that room of your own, that virtual room of your own.
Yeah. One thing that I always feel is important in any learning opportunity is just time to share a thought. And I think right now in our lives, I think time and space is really seen differently based on what's going on in this world. And I just wanted to share the very end of this quote by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, where he says, the meaning of Sabbath, Shabbat, is to celebrate time rather than space. 6 days a week, we live under the tyranny of things of space. On the Shabbat, we try to become attuned to holiness in time. It is a day on which we are called upon to share in what is eternal in time, to turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world. And as strange as it may seem, to me, the time that Judith and I set aside to learn together also felt like a different time of Shabbat, because it was this moment of time, a celebration of time in a profoundly different way than we're really used to, based on the hustle and bustle of all of our, you know, normal lives. I think
and there was this like, you know, that you mekadesh, you sanctify Shabbat. I think there was this sense of this mekadesh, this sanctification around the time that we had Chavruta. My kids knew, like, I was like, I'm in Chavruta now, don't bother me. Like, oh, Mom's in Chavruta. Like I remember, like, I was learning with Daniella, and once one of the children came to bother me, and Daniella said, oh, they look so scared to bother you, because, you know, there was this sense that this was sacred time. This was sacred time.
Really sweet. The thing that really we wanted to end with before we opened it up for questions and comments is this really beautiful midrash in Bamidbar Rabbah, which talks about this law that if you see many, many people, like thousands of people, that there's this bracha that we say that thanks God for knowing secrets, and that just as people's faces are different, every person's understanding of this world is different, and understanding of different ideas is different. And Moshe, as he, you know, requested from God right before he died, you know, he said, please, make sure that when I leave this world, that there's a leader who can sustain every single person according to his or her own understanding. Meaning he wanted to be sure that even as he left this world as a leader, every single person with whom he had the opportunity to lead, that their thoughts and their ideas, which were very, very different from each other, would all have a chance to be honored and sanctified. And I think, you know, when I think about this world and our profound opportunity to meet people, especially now, you know, so many of you I've never seen before in my life. And you know, from that, this is our first meeting. Maybe we'll have many more meetings. And from Judith, where I met her for the first time, really, you know, one time in December, where we decided to learn together from that point forward, I think there's this beautiful opportunity to really think deeply to what it means to truly understand others. And a chavruta experience just gives you one eye into that moment of really digging deeply into what somebody else can bring to this world. And those somebody else's are all over us every single day. So I just really want to thank everybody, especially to those of you who really opened up in this conversation and shared, and those of you who could come and sanctify that space to learn together at times when I know many of you are surrounded by busy lives. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see everybody again.
Does anybody have any questions or comments for Judith and Daniella?
Yes, I do. This is Evelyn. I want to know, after 3 wonderful years as chavruta for each other, are you going to continue this?
We have. We are. So we've continued the chavruta. We've got, so it's Daniella's Thursday night, my Friday afternoon. That's our chavruta time. We've embarked on another project of what to learn. It's actually the laws of Shabbat is what we've started, is what we've decided to dive deep. And we even thought we might invite our husbands along to learn with us as well. So yeah, what started out as a 3-year endeavor, I think will be a lifetime friendship and a lifetime of learning.
That's a real bonus, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
I have a question, it's probably directed at Daniella more, being the wife of a congregational rabbi, and this is to do with your comments about Shabbat, where, you know, those of us, you know, people who work a normal weekday, Shabbat, you can relax. As the congregational rabbi and wife, you actually are on duty on Shabbat. We know you will have guests for Shabbat dinner. You have guests for Shabbat lunch. You're there at shul every Shabbat morning. You're actually at top speed then. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. Well, firstly, the most amazing part of COVID has been that we have been really quiet on Shabbat. So the past 4 or 5 months have allowed me to reflect on Shabbat in a really different way. But secondly, you know, I really find so much peace in the community that we take part in. And even though I know that many of the people that I go to shul with are people whose children I teach and the children that I'm with every single day, there is this real space of time that's honored in a profound way. I think I'm really lucky to be living in the community that I'm living in. The other thing that's really important is we do absolutely have guests Friday night, and Saturday we stay at shul for Kiddush at the shul, but Saturday afternoon, you know, between that time and then the time that people will come over later in the day, especially if it's a longer Shabbat, is really time that we spend as a family. And I think it's time that I never take for granted. And, you know, with Saul and I, we really try to trade off in terms of who has the kids. If there's one evening that I have something to do, he'll be with the children, and the reverse, which really means that Shabbat is one of those evenings where it's really special because we can both be home with our children. And that to me feels really special and different. Phil, can you relate? No, you're nodding.
Thank you.
I had a question also.
Go ahead.
I'm curious. Both of you were already like really immersed in a community, and then kind of late after years of being there, emerged as rabbinic leaders. So, what is that experience like? Having like maybe being seen in a different role, or wanting to serve in a different way, in a community that you were already so involved in.
Judith, I think you should speak to that because I think your role has changed really profoundly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been a community member at my shul, but I've always felt that I've been also a community builder and someone who like wants to contribute. And I think this, as soon as the news got out that I'd passed my smicha, it was like that on steroids. There's just been this wave of embrace by the community of me. And I can see that role sort of transitioning as people, you know, before I was sort of, you know, this was something on the side. More and more it's becoming a part of my life as people sort of ask questions, as I'm doing more and more presentations and talks. And I think what it has also done, like I mentioned this to my husband because I said, well, I'm still me. Like what changed between, the day before smicha and the day after smicha? But I think what it reflects is this hunger and this thirst within the community for knowledge and for connection, and that I can really, like, in terms of what that role is and how that role has changed, I can be this conduit for connection, and people, like, having that smicha really gives you that visibility of being able to do that.
Do you find that there are women who have a personal issue that they might have felt reluctant to go to a male rabbi, and now are so happy that it's something that they wanted to discuss with a rabbi, but not a man, and are so happy to have you there to discuss that with?
Definitely. I had that experience even before, like, completing the exam, where people would come and will ask me questions, and not necessarily, like, women would ask me questions, not necessarily questions that might pertain just to, like, women or relationships, just any questions that it's more accessible or more approachable. And I think, so what I say is, in my day job at Legal Aid, it's about access to justice and providing access to the law for people who are disadvantaged. And I carry this idea of access to the law with me in this rabbinic role, that really being a woman and being sort of, there's this level of being more approachable, I guess, that allows people and has allowed people to come forward. So if that means that means it's another avenue for people to connect and to approach Judaism.
Are there any other questions? Well, we are right on the hour now. I cannot even begin to thank both of you enough. This has been the most inspiring, enlightening session. Warm, your warmth, both of you, has just shone through. This was beyond anything that I could have imagined it would be, and we're so grateful to you both for joining us and for sharing your lives and your learning. And trust me, we're getting you back. You will be back. I want to wish everybody Shabbat Shalom. Thank you all for being here, for joining us.